This episode was made possible by Patreon. Visit the link in the description to find out more. Hello and welcome to Once More with Feeling, Patreon request time. First time in a while that I'll be doing this. Going to be covering a couple of interesting albums that were recently brought to my attention. The Protomen albums. Now this came about as a consequence of me and a friend talking about the Glory Hammer albums. He'd recently listened to them and I was saying about how the different band members are named after the various characters on the albums. And he likened it to the band members of the Protomen. I hadn't heard anything about this band, and so he explained that at least the first two albums were based on the Mega Man series, and the names of certain band members were in keeping with that. You've got things like the Merchant, the Keeper, the Replicant. Those are actually older band members. Another example on drums, you've got Reanimator for the more recent iteration. You've got Kilroy, which that's a double reference, so I'm quite amused by that. Overall, it's quite interesting to look at how they've integrated the band members' names. Now, none of the band members were hyperlinked, so I'm not 100% sure it's not a case of them reinventing their character names and just going under different aliases every few years just to keep things fresh. If anyone knows any more, then I'd love to hear. Like, this has been a bit of a dig to find out information. It actually says on the Wikipedia that not much is known about the band aside from the key aspects of them and the style of music they do. But anyway, this has been a bit of a different take for me because of a few things. Firstly, there is the whole concept album. I have covered concept albums in the past, but nothing so specific as this, with the exception of the Primus album, which was based on a children's book. I've never covered anything so specifically based on something like Mega Man, and that in itself is off the beaten path for me because I have not played any of the Mega Man games. I didn't grow up with consoles. My parents just didn't think that we needed anything aside from the PC. But enough about that. The other thing that makes this very different is there is no one particular genre that you can say this album falls under. There's mixtures of prog rock, punk, country, and muse-like stylings. That is all just in the first song. So this was very, very complex for me to dissect. So without further ado, let's get straight into it with the first of these two albums, the Protomen. So the overall driving concept of this album is to take the idea of the Mega Man series and to reframe it as this dark dystopic future in which Dr. Wily has won. You open with Hope Rides Alone, and it frames initially a sort of country rock troubadour style. You've got that quick-paced guitar that really helps to set the stage.
No one was left who could remember how it had happened. And the world had fallen under darkness. At least no one who would do anything. No one who would oppose the robots. No one who would challenge their power. Or so Dr. Wily believed.
Gives you this idea of Dr. Light, in secret, working against Dr. Wily's efforts and creating Protoman. And as it progresses, it becomes gradually more sort of prog rocky, with punk rock affectations, and generally you get this idea of, as it's reaching its climax, it's getting more and more manic and chaotic. And you really get this idea of Protomen being the first one to fight against Dr. Wily's forces, but ultimately, because of standing alone, being overwhelmed.
Wiley rose above the countless robots remaining. Protomen was wounded, low on energy, struggling to remain standing as Wiley ordered the final attack. The death of Protomen.
That leads nicely into Funeral for a Son. This has a nice sort of 90s RPG sound. If you've ever played some of the first-person shooter D&D style games from that era, then you'll get that sort of feel from this. Maybe this is me mishearing things, but it has that sort of feel of if they'd taken Mega Man 3's theme and change the key, and you certainly feel like it's sort of this funereal lamentation. And the idea behind it is Dr. Light returns to his workshop and sets out to destroy it, but ultimately, inadvertently, creates Mega Man. You feel sort of a frustration and resentment. You kind of get this idea that in the liner notes they present it as such that Dr. Light has developed a resentment for those who would not stand with Protomen and just look to him to be a hero instead of being their own. But you certainly get this good feel for the music telling that story. From there, you've got Unrest in the House of Light. Once again, a slight change up with musical styles, much more of a country rock feel going on there, and you definitely get this sort of earnest storytelling feel. It's Dr. Light telling the tale of Protoman to Mega Man, and how as a consequence he does not want to see Mega Man go down the same path. And there's this nice, cool, low vocal affectation that really helps to give this feel of not simply a vocalist, but also a narrator.
There was another who came before you. He was a hero and your brother and my son. He fought the darkness won.
It's actually one of my favourites on the album because it really gives this nice core sense of build until an ultimate explosion, and once again you're able to read between the lines and see the story that they're painting, in that you've got the tale being told and then Mega Man defiantly declaring that he will pick up the fight. And what really drives that whole idea home is this refrain of "You cannot win," screamed by Dr. Light. And I really feel like that's kind of giving a full sense of what this album is ultimately about, and the back and forth that constantly occurs throughout the album. After that, you have The Will of One. Now, that is ultimately a response to Unrest in the House of Light. It's Mega Man outright going into the streets and racing through, acting as a rallying force for the downtrodden and disaffected. I feel what really brings it home and gives it a full sense of being a response is in the lines, it really gives this idea of Mega Man going, you may think that we are all doomed, but I am still going to try. It's got that really nice, heroic, defiant declaration, and I feel it's one of those cases of those two lines are really what's needed to bring it home. You get this really cool refrain sort of near the end of and that really helps to give this idea of Mega Man bringing hope and light to this dark and depressed and despondent city. From there, we have Vengeance. Now that once again changes the musical style of the album to more straight up hardcore punk. But it works really well for this whole idea of a full-on fight going on, with Mega Man racing towards Dr. Wily's fortress to face off against the robots, and establishes Protoman as one of the villains. What's cool about that is the fact that it's more directly drawing upon sort of Mega Man 3, and really gives you this idea of sort of the disdain and resentment that Protoman has built up for humanity as a consequence of feeling like he was left alone to die.
Are you wounded? Those of you who can, pick yourselves off the ground.
This may have been me hearing things, but I feel like it did utilise the whistle effect that would precede Protoman's appearance in the games. I think they did similar in Funeral for a Son, but as I say, this has all been a bit of a research extravaganza for me. I had to delve quite a bit into the actual soundtrack to really understand a few things. But definitely really gives you this feel of things are coming to a head. From there, we have the stand parentheses man or machine. This is Protoman's song. This is his declaration of his resentment for humanity for not taking a stand for themselves, and how he feels that he was completely left to die and no one would help him. The style of this song is very much in the vein of a rock musical, with a dark, powerful piano leading it, and the guitar work feeling very much like a frustrated pounding of impotent rage. You can almost imagine Mega Man faced with this truth, just completely incapable to decide what he should do. What's really cool is that there's this vocal effect going on that implies a far greater leaning towards the robots than was originally present.
I've given everything I can. There are no heroes left in men. So it begins.
From there, we have the Sons of Fate. That's a really cool back and forth going on between Mega Man and Protoman. It's sort of the argument of Mega Man saying why they should stand and Protoman saying that they will stand for nothing. It very much keeps in the vein of The Stand in terms of musical style. It just goes more prog rocky in terms of the actual instrumentation, but it very much feels like they're framing it as Mega Man seeing Protoman's point of view when Protoman is eventually defeated and Mega Man, in his despair, turns his back and ultimately leaves the human populace to be utterly slaughtered by the robots. What's really cool is that there's a callback to Hope Rides Alone in this chant from the humans of as they're dying, and Mega Man can hear it. And it's got this very cool, rather devastating, haunting effect. It'll be interesting to see where it goes from here. I will admit, I haven't listened to the next album yet. I felt like I needed to focus my attention to each album as I did the reviews for them. So we'll find out what comes next. But after that, The Sons of Fate is the last song proper. But you have a nice little coda in Jew Vendetta, which is essentially a roll call of the various key enemy robots from Mega Man, you know. And it just goes full Nintendo core with that. I feel like it's a nice little send-off. It's easing us back to reality with that one. So overall, I would give this album a 4 out of 5. I really enjoyed it, and in their own right, the songs are all excellent. I just would have liked to have heard more sound cues from the actual Mega Man soundtrack. I can understand why that might not have been entirely viable if it was a case of they tried to work more in, but it just didn't stick. Then that's fair enough. With that said, I greatly encourage everyone to give this album a listen. All the songs are on YouTube, and you can pick up the album on Bandcamp if you really enjoy it. That's it for this episode. Next time we will be returning to this journey with Act 2, The Father of Death.